Hello, I'm Doug White, and welcome to NBC 10 Biographies. In this episode, we will meet two individuals who devoted their energies to preserving the unique architecture of the Ocean State. But that is where the similarities end. Doris Duke's generosity helped transform Newport, but her philanthropy was often overshadowed by a controversial lifestyle. Antoinette Downing used a quieter approach, but she was fearless in her crusade to defend Rhode Island's architectural heritage. We begin this edition of NBC 10 Biographies with Doris Duke.
Newport, Rhode Island is famous for its mansions. Tourists from around the world are eager to experience the grand lifestyles of the millionaires who built these magnificent homes. At the end of Bellevue Avenue stands one of the most impressive estates of all. But Rough Point, the home of Doris Duke, has been strictly off limits to the public until now. Doris Duke was born in 1912. Her father, James Duke, was a tobacco baron who left his daughter a fortune in excess of $100 million. Miss Duke became one of the richest women in the world and one of the least understood.
But people have wild misconceptions about Doris. She was a very intelligent, very imaginative, talented woman who did not suffer fools gladly. And she had the temperament and the wit to be able to cope with her tremendous wealth.
Welcome to Rough Point, the home of Doris Duke.
Rough Point, Duke's Newport home, can provide some interesting clues about her true identity.
I do think that people want to come and draw back the curtain on Doris Duke and find out a little bit more about her. She was a fascinating person. There were a lot of aspects of her personality which will surprise people and interest people, and they will certainly see them when they come here.
Rough Point was built by Frederick Vanderbilt beginning in 1887. He had purchased two estates on the point and combined them into one, totaling about 10 acres. The Leeds family bought the house in 1905, selling it in 1922 to James B. Duke. The Duke family did extensive renovations on the house and increased its area by about 25%. When the work was done in the summer of 1924, the family moved in, and a portrait of Doris was painted by the artist John DaTosta. It shows Doris as a young girl of 12.
She did mention that that painting spoiled her whole summer while it was being painted. I guess she really dreaded posing for it. She told me that there was one good day that summer, and that was the day that the painter put the paintbrush in his mouth wrong end too.
Much has been said and written about Doris Duke. All too frequently, those being quoted have had little or no direct knowledge of this extraordinary woman. Phil Mello worked closely with Miss Duke for years. Her hands-on approach to restoration has been one of the secrets of this estate. Now, after 30 years of guarding her privacy, Phil Mello breaks his silence and gives his first television interview.
She would come up to my shop and work with me, and we'd be together could be for 4 hours a day or 2 hours a day. And if it was a big project, she'd stick with it. She might be with me most of the day. All the furniture you see here in the house was placed by her, just exactly. And she liked it to see that it stayed there. Whenever we got a new maid in, some of them, they decided that this certain ashtray looks better over there. Well, that didn't go. That ashtray was returned very quickly to its exact location.
Doris Duke's father is said to have warned her never to trust people. Buck Duke feared that those attracted to her great wealth would hound his daughter throughout her life.
Because let me tell you, that money is both absolutely marvelous and very, very tough. It's tough because you know that people are looking at you or around your surrounding, and you never know who is there, really. Even the help that is not grasping for something.
This is the dining room at Rough Point. As you can see, it's a very commodious room with ample space for a large dinner party of a dozen people or more. As it happened, Doris Duke preferred smaller dinner gatherings of 4, maybe 6 people tops. Dinner guests would sit at this large Flemish Renaissance-style oak table. All of the candles would be flickering and a fire was set in the fireplace.
Dinner guests at Rough Point were treated like royalty, but they also could be treated to Miss Duke's sharp wit.
We sit down and Doris says, "Now, what would everybody like to drink? What would you like to have, Mrs. Atherton?" And Maud said, "Oh, could I have a little bourbon?" And Doris said, "Bourbon?" And she poured out a nice tumbler full of bourbon for Mrs. Atherton, and Maud said, "Oh, may I have a little ice?" "Certainly not," said Doris, "it's much too good."
The Great Hall at Rough Point was not necessarily a place for parties and celebrations, as was often the case in other mansions along Bellevue Avenue, but it was really an art gallery for the wonderful collections assembled by James B. Duke and later by Doris Duke. One of the best paintings purchased for this room by James Duke is a portrait of Raphael Franco by Thomas Gainsborough. The collection of art in this room rivals that of many art museums throughout the country, and we're particularly fortunate that Rough Point remains today exactly as it was the last time Doris Duke was here.
Her money and fame made it difficult for Doris Duke to find privacy. At times, even the walls around Rough Point were not enough to protect her from curiosity seekers.
People would come and they'd shout over the fence at her. Sometimes it could be just some other woman and they'd be hollering over the fence, "Hi, Miss Duke." They wouldn't even know for sure that it was her, and they'd be hollering.
This is referred to as the Red Room. At the time of the enlargement of the house, it was indicated as being the daughter's room. Doris Duke would have stayed here through her teenage years until she was married in 1935.
Doris Duke's life had its share of tragedy. Her father died when she was just 12 years old. She was married twice and divorced twice. Her only child died at birth.
The money she had magnified a lot of the things that happened to her. Everybody has tragedies, everybody has good things that happen to them, and I think because of the lifestyle into which she was born, those got magnified, probably unfairly.
Miss Duke was often described in the press as a wealthy recluse, but that label seems wrong to those who knew her.
She was not reclusive. All that she was reclusive about people interfering with her privacy or her time. But Doris had a pretty active life, really.
She occasionally would take a trip to China, to Russia, to Ireland, whatever. So far, far, far from being a recluse.
This is the Yellow Room. This is a room Doris Duke used for formal entertainment. The decor of the room is largely Louis XVI, including this lovely silk upholstered settee and armchairs. It hugs the fireplace, which is George III. Doris Duke entertained friends here, such as Jackie Kennedy, Imelda Marcos, and movie stars. The room was lit by this 12-light rock crystal chandelier.
Doris Duke is depicted in an unauthorized biography as being tyrannical when dealing with her staff. But those with first-hand knowledge paint a different picture of her management style. She could be demanding, they say, but was willing to admit when she was wrong.
She did have the wonderful ability to apologize. I was amazed. A couple of times she'd return here to Newport, get off the helicopter, and come all the way up to my shop immediately to apologize.
Rough Point was considered Doris Duke's primary summer residence. She would arrive here early in May and stay on till the end of November. She also had a home in Somerville, New Jersey, Duke Farms, and she had a penthouse apartment in New York City. At the end of November, she would return to her home in Hawaii, Shangri-La.
In October of 1966, Doris Duke's interior designer and friend, Eduardo Torrea, was killed as the two were leaving the estate. Duke said she put her foot on the gas pedal by mistake as Torrea was opening the gates. The police called it a freak accident. But the incident became the object of rumor, speculation, and misinformation.
While walking the beach near her house in Hawaii, I met a neighbor, an older man, and we talked. And he said, "Oh, you work over there for her, do you?" I said, "Yeah, yeah." He said, "Well, be careful. She ran over the chauffeur up there." So that each one of the houses had that rumor that she had run over the chauffeur.
The story of Doris Duke continues when NBC 10 Biographies returns.
In 1968, Doris Duke founded the Newport Restoration Foundation. She spent millions of dollars saving the city's architectural heritage and personally supervised the restoration of almost 100 colonial houses. Now, her mansion, Rough Point, located on 10 acres of prime oceanfront real estate, will be opened as a public museum.
She was a very generous person. This house is an act of generosity. It is one of the best art collections in Newport, and she made this available to people to see.
This is Miss Duke's bedroom. She usually took breakfast in bed right here in order to take advantage of the lovely view of the ocean that you'll see. To my left, over the fireplace, is a Renoir that was purchased by Miss Duke in New York to add to the art collection in the home. And here we'll go into her bathroom, where there is a baccarat crystal cut glass dressing table where she would sit to prepare her makeup and hair. You see a Tiffany gold dresser set here with her monogram on it.
Critics have accused Doris Duke of using only a small fraction of her wealth for charitable purposes during her lifetime. But her defenders argue that many of her acts of charity were anonymous.
She was very careful about not advertising what she gave. I mean, quite aside from the buildings and things like that, she was very generous to people whom she thought would needed it.
Everyone who knew her agrees that Doris Duke's love for animals was genuine. She kept 2 camels as pets on her Newport estate. When Hurricane Bob struck, she made special arrangements for their safety and comfort.
So she decided that right in this very room, we would bring them in. And when Hurricane Bob came along, that's what we did. We emptied this room, and we brought the camels in. We put hay down on the floor, and they were here for a few hours. It worked out real well.
Always a powerful swimmer, Doris Duke often plunged into the choppy waters behind Rough Point. But as she grew older, it became increasingly difficult for her to walk to the ocean. The solution to this problem was constructed in the basement of her mansion.
In 1991, Miss Duke had this pool built because she loved to swim. And that was at a point when she really couldn't walk too well to get down to the ocean to swim. So we built the pool here. She enjoyed it so much that she actually started to using it before we had completely finished putting the walls up. And she loved to swim in salt water. She believed that salt water had curative powers.
Doris Duke died in Beverly Hills in 1993. Her death was attributed to natural causes. News of her demise swiftly reached the staff at Rough Point.
She was gone, and there was a lot of attention on this house. And I basically just locked the gates and ran the place like it was a prison. I didn't let anybody in unless they absolutely belonged in here, and that's the way I did it.
Doris Duke left an estate worth $1.2 billion divided among friends and numerous charitable and educational institutions. It was a final act of compassion by a woman who had frequently been maligned by a hostile press and a public hungry for scandal.
I think that she was a very private person. When you have this mystique that builds about your life and you have that kind of resources at your disposal and you choose to be private, people often choose to fill in the gaps in whatever way they choose, and that often becomes a sort of tabloid process, if you will.
She had a lot of tragedy in her life, but then a lot of people do. And look what she did with her life, in spite of it.
The life of Antoinette Downing when NBC 10 Biographies continues.
Antoinette Forrester Downing was born in 1904. Antoinette and her younger brother Jay were raised in an environment that emphasized the importance of education, music, and a love of classical literature. Downing's father died when she was just 9 years old. Her mother moved the family to Springer, New Mexico. Her academic achievements allowed her to skip the 7th grade. She graduated from high school in 1921. Accepted at the University of Chicago, she graduated with honors and continued her education at Radcliffe. Downing's work would one day win national recognition, but she suffered the indignity of being kicked out of a library at Harvard because she was in a study room reserved for men only. In 1929, she married George Downing, an art instructor at the University of Chicago. The Downings moved to Rhode Island in 1932 when George joined the faculty at Brown University. Here, they would raise their family and become well-known members of the academic community. In the 1950s, Brown University and the Rhode Island School of Design began to expand their campuses. The rapid demolition of 18th and 19th century homes on the east side led to the formation of the Providence Preservation Society. As a founding member of the society, Antoinette Downing worked tirelessly to prevent the destruction of a unique collection of houses on Benefit Street. The organization's goals were lofty, but there were plenty of obstacles to be overcome.
Some hard questions were asked. I won't say everybody was in love with it. There was communication. There were always tough questions from the bankers. Where the heck's the money coming from? We have no loans. We have no way of, you're dreamers. There were some terribly tough questions.
Tempers flared when an overzealous member of the Preservation Society mocked the university's expansion plans.
He had a great big piece of white paper, and he drew Brown as an octopus. And I'll clue you, they didn't like it one damn bit because they were upset. We're the evil monster. Our tentacles are out.
Eventually, Downing and the Providence Preservation Society prevailed. The houses on Benefit Street, slated for demolition, were purchased and restored. The idea that progress meant tearing down the old to make way for the new was being challenged.
There was a movement in those days to tear down buildings like this one, like the City Hall, like the Performing Arts Theater, which later on they wanted to tear down. And she convinced me that that wasn't the right thing to do.
Downing realized that education was often the key to winning the support of a skeptical public.
I remember sponsoring with her some books that were pamphlets for every neighborhood, and people were absolutely amazed that they lived in a historic house, or this street had some history. Well, of course it did. You just never stopped to recognize it.
Downing's concern for Rhode Island's architectural heritage transcended personalities or politics.
She had credibility, she had a desire, determination, and knowledge. And she had that personality where she didn't have her own agenda. You see, she didn't have an agenda. The only agenda she had was historic preservation.
In 1968, Downing was named chairwoman of the newly formed Rhode Island Historical Preservation Commission.
She had what was at the time a very unique outlook, that historic preservation was a way to renew neighborhoods.
The philosophy that Antoinette Downing was preaching to those with the power to shape the future of communities was nothing short of revolutionary.
She had this idea that old buildings were worth saving, and she turned it into such a commonplace that we no longer even realize what a startling, groundbreaking idea she had.
Downing's instinctual respect for the hidden qualities of each unique structure became legendary.
She liked the feel of houses. I heard her tell more than one new owner of a historic house not to make any changes during the first year. She'd advise people to live in the house, listen to the house, let the house speak to you.
Antoinette Downing earned a reputation as someone who was willing to compromise if necessary. But it was a mistake to underestimate her commitment to the preservation of those buildings she felt were irreplaceable.
Some of us on the staff used to think of her as almost like a mother bear defending her cubs. And if the Urban Renewal Agency or the Department of Transportation or the official from the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development came in and wanted to knock down one of the historic buildings she cared about, she did not let up.
In 1987, Antoinette Downing received the National Trust for Historic Preservation's highest honor, the Crown and Shield Award.
How'd she feel? I think she was deeply moved and very, very, in her own way, pleased. But she was very modest. She wouldn't brag.
Downing retired from the Rhode Island Historic Preservation Commission in 1995 at the age of 91. Inspired by her example, others have now taken up the cause of historic preservation. But her absence from the commission is deeply felt.
Her presence and her knowledge and her direction, very, very badly missed. There is not another voice that is equal in power, not that I know of. There may be a lot of wannabe Antoinettes, but really, truly, she stands alone.
NBC 10 Biographies will continue in a moment.
Thank you for being with us. I'm Doug White, and be sure to join us next time for another edition of NBC 10 Biographies.